It started like any ordinary morning. A sleek black Lincoln Continental pulled off I-94 into a quiet rest stop just west of Lansing, Michigan. It was around 10:07 a.m. The breeze was mild, the lot half empty. Just a few travelers stretching their legs, sipping lukewarm gas station coffee. Nothing unusual except for the man inside that car. He wore a slate grey suit, sharply tailored, with a light blue dress shirt, and his polished shoes barely made a sound when they touched the pavement. On the passenger seat, a leather portfolio rested neatly. Inside, briefing notes, legal memos, and a printed agenda for the governor's roundtable on criminal justice reform, scheduled at noon. That man was Judge Marcus Ellison. 23 years on the bench. Countless rulings. A reputation across Michigan for his calm demeanor and unwavering fairness. He'd overseen some of the toughest courtrooms in the state, and yet, that morning, sitting quietly in his car reviewing notes, none of that mattered. Because Marcus was black. And when a white state trooper cruiser pulled into the rest stoplights flashing, engine still running, that was the only detail Officer Darren Jeffers noticed. A black man. Alone. In a luxury car. At a quiet rest stop. Suspicion wasn't just in the air, it was procedure. Marcus saw the cruiser in his mirror. He lowered his window slowly, both hands resting calmly on the steering wheel. He'd lived long enough to know how these moments could go sideways in seconds. "Good morning, officer," he said with composed ease. "Is everything all right?" Jeffers didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across Marcus's face, then down to the crisp lapels of his suit, as if the very professionalism of his appearance was cause for concern. "We got a report," Jeffers finally said, voice clipped. "Stolen vehicle matching this description, seen leaving a gas station about 15 miles back." Marcus blinked, not in fear but in disbelief. "I'm not aware of any such report," he said. "I just pulled over for a short break before my meeting in Lansing. If you'd like, I can show you my registration." But Jeffers didn't want the registration. He wanted control. He stepped back and dropped his hand to the holstered weapon at his hip. "Step out of the vehicle, now." The officer's tone had shifted. No longer procedural now, it was sharp. Accusatory. Loud enough to draw glances from nearby travelers. Marcus could have argued, could have demanded to know why. But instead, he chose stillness. He opened the car door slowly and stepped out, his 6-foot frame dignified and steady. The breeze caught his coat slightly, and for a second, just a second, he looked like a man about to walk into a courtroom. Not into handcuffs. By the time Officer Rachel Kerr arrived, Jeffers' partner, just minutes behind the scene, was already escalating. Marcus stood at the rear of his car, hands up, as Jeffers barked accusations and circled the vehicle like a predator. Rachel hesitated. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she didn't say anything either. "I'd like to know what I'm being accused of," Marcus said. His voice was calm, but there was something in it now. Something quiet, something gathering. Jeffers didn't respond. He opened the driver's side door and started searching the glove compartment without permission, without a warrant. Marcus stepped forward an inch. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle." That was all Jeffers needed. "That's obstruction," he barked. "Turn around." Before Marcus could speak again, his arm was twisted behind his back. The cuffs clicked closed. Officer Kerr, still uncertain, stepped in to secure the other wrist. And in that moment, this highly respected state judge, who had spent his life upholding the law, became nothing more than a suspicious man in a nice car. A few travelers had stopped watching. A young college student filmed quietly from across the lot. A retired Navy vet shook his head and muttered, "He doesn't look like a thief. He looks like someone important." But Officer Jeffers wasn't interested in context. Only compliance. Marcus said nothing as they led him to the back of the cruiser. Even with his hands bound behind his back, his posture remained upright. His eyes didn't dart, didn't plead. They calculated. Not in fear. In strategy. Inside the back seat of that police car, he wasn't just a man wronged, he was a man preparing, thinking, measuring, watching. Because what those officers didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that the man they just arrested would be presiding over their misconduct hearing within 48 hours. But for now, he sat still. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Inside the Jackson State Police Precinct, the air was stale with fluorescent light and quiet assumptions. Judge Marcus Ellison sat on a hard plastic bench in a small holding area, his suit still immaculate. His wrists bore faint red lines from the cuffs marks that would fade before sundown, unlike the memory of how they got there. He hadn't been formally charged. No one read him his rights. No one allowed him a phone call. They simply took his ID, typed something into a system, and left him waiting, like a shadow, like a placeholder. Across the room, Officer Jeffers paced, not frantic, just edgy. He passed by the holding room twice, each time tossing Marcus a sideways glance, as if trying to reconcile the calmness of the man with the story his bias had already written. Officer Kerr stood in the corner, fidgeting with her radio. She hadn't said much since the arrest. Her eyes flicked toward Marcus more often now, but still she said nothing. Silence, in some places, is more violent than words. Marcus had asked politely, clearly, and more than once to contact his office. "I have a scheduled appointment at the Capitol in less than 2 hours," he said. "I need to inform them of my delay." Each time, he was dismissed with the same shrug. "You'll get your chance. Sit tight." He sat. Not out of obedience, but out of principle. He wasn't about to become the outburst they were waiting for. He had presided over too many cases where young men, especially black men, lost control in that exact moment. Moments that became their undoing. Marcus would not give them the pleasure. Not today. Still, the whispers floated past him. Who does he think he is? Too calm. That's always suspicious. He's dressed like he's trying to impress someone. He heard it all. But he didn't flinch. Somewhere nearby, a printer whirred. Phones rang. Radios squawked with routine calls. But in that holding room, time thickened. This wasn't about criminal process anymore. This was about ego. Power. The comfort of prejudice. And Marcus had seen it all before from the bench. The door swung open. Sergeant Pamela Yates entered, clipboard in hand, steps brisk and deliberate. She was in her early 50s, hair neatly tucked into a bun, and eyes trained to notice what others missed. She barely glanced at Jeffers as she spoke. "How long's he been in there?" A voice from a nearby desk replied, "Almost 2 hours. Obstruction and possible vehicle match." Yates frowned, then turned to Marcus. "Sir, have you been read your rights?" Marcus gave a small nod. "Yes, but I have not been permitted to call my office, despite asking multiple times." She paused. Something in his tone controlled, deliberate made her raise an eyebrow. "What's your name?" "Marcus Ellison." There was a beat of silence. Then he added, "And I highly recommend someone checks that name before this situation becomes irreversible." From behind her, Jeffers scoffed. "He's been playing that 'I'm someone important' card since we brought him in." Sergeant Yates didn't smile. She didn't even turn. "That's enough," she said, her voice quiet but heavy with authority. She walked to the nearest workstation, typed into the system, and began scanning his profile. Expecting a traffic violation. Maybe an expired plate. But as the records loaded, her eyes narrowed. Academic honors, federal clerkships, judicial appointments, 23 years on the bench. Then finally, the Honorable Marcus A. Ellison, Presiding Judge 12th District Court, State of Michigan. Her hand stilled over the keyboard. She double-checked the ID photo. It matched. Perfectly. She looked back through the glass window of the holding area. The man in the suit. The man they had cuffed. The man who hadn't raised his voice, even once. Yates stood up. Her boots struck the tile with sharp, deliberate steps. Jeffers was still leaning against the wall, arms folded, smug. Until Yates opened the door. And the air changed. "You said you had a meeting in Lansing," she asked Marcus. "Yes," he replied. "A criminal justice reform roundtable. I'm due to speak." She took a breath, then said softly, but clearly, "Your Honor, I apologize. This should never have happened." Behind her, Jeffers straightened. "Wait, what do you mean, Your Honor?" Yates turned slowly toward him. "You arrested a sitting state judge without probable cause. You searched his vehicle without a warrant. You denied him his right to legal counsel. This is serious." Jeffers blanched, his jaw tightened, his composure cracking. He didn't act like a judge, he didn't say anything. "You had his ID," she snapped. "It was your job to verify it." Yates turned to Kerr, who now looked like she wanted to disappear. "You cuffed him too. Did either of you think to confirm his identity?" Silence. No excuses now, just the kind of quiet that follows realization. Heavy, embarrassed, cold. Yates turned back to Marcus, her tone now formal, respectful. "Sir, would you like to contact the governor's office or be driven to Lansing immediately?" Marcus gave her a small nod. "Yes, thank you, Sergeant." She led him out. This time, no one touched his arms, no one pushed him forward, no one barked orders. But all around him, heads turned, desks stopped buzzing, eyes widened. The same man who'd been dismissed, ignored, and cuffed now walked through that precinct with dignity restored. And as he passed through those fluorescent hallways, he didn't look angry. He looked focused, because what came next would be history in the making. By nightfall, the internet had already done its work. The video, just 27 seconds long, had exploded. A young college student had captured it all, the moment Judge Marcus Ellison, calm and composed, was handcuffed beside his black Lincoln by 2 state troopers. His voice in the clip was clear and measured. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong." In the background, the student's voice trembled with disbelief. "He didn't do anything. This is insane." The caption, "Black man arrested at rest stop just for sitting in a nice car." It spread like fire on dry brush. TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. Within 3 hours, 700,000 views. By midnight, over 2.4 million. Hashtags surged. Number, justice for Ellison. Number, judged before justice. Number, rest stop profiling. Screenshots of Judge Ellison's official profile began surfacing next to freeze frames of his arrest. The contrast was unbearable. The dignity of his title next to the indignity of his treatment, it struck a chord. By morning, the story had gone national. Local stations camped outside the Jackson precinct. Civil rights leaders issued statements. Politicians scrambled to respond. And in a quiet room at the state capitol in Lansing, staffers frantically prepared for what was once a routine roundtable, now a full-blown press event. At precisely 10 a.m., the heavy double doors of the governor's meeting room opened. Judge Marcus Ellison walked in. No guards, no entourage, just him, in a deep navy suit, crisp as his presence. In one hand, the same leather portfolio they'd found in his car. In the other, his silence. Carried like a sword. The room stood. Not out of protocol, but out of respect. The governor, already seated, rose as well. "Judge Ellison," he said, voice lowered, "we're honored to have you here." Ellison nodded gently. "Thank you, Governor. I believe the timing speaks for itself." There was a beat of stillness. Then Marcus raised his eyes, looked around the table, and spoke with the quiet power of someone who'd carried the law in his bones for decades. "Yesterday morning," he began, "on my way to this very meeting, I was detained. I was handcuffed. I was denied due process. Not for anything I did, but for how I appeared. There was no probable cause, no reasonable suspicion, just a glance, a guess, and an assumption." The room didn't breathe. He continued, "This is not about my title, not about one man. It's about how deeply the threads of prejudice are woven into the very systems we ask people to trust." A younger assemblywoman lowered her head, wiping away a tear. Marcus looked down for a moment, then back up. "I've spent my life in courtrooms trying to build that trust. But trust demands more than words. It requires action, accountability, and above all, the presumption of dignity." The governor sat back, eyes narrowed in thought. Around the table, aides tapped their pens, unsure how to respond to the sheer weight in the room. Until someone did. An older civil rights leader, seated near the end, leaned in. "Would you be willing," she asked, "to help oversee an emergency review of the officers involved?" There was hesitation. Ellison wasn't a man who sought retribution. He wasn't interested in becoming a symbol for spectacle. But this wasn't about ego. It was about precedent. "I'll do it," he said at last, "if only to ensure the process is fair to them and to the public." That same afternoon, a hearing was scheduled. Swift, transparent, public. Inside a packed lower chamber, cameras flashed. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Legal observers, state staff, and even members of the public watched from the gallery. When officers Darren Jeffers and Rachel Kerr entered the room, their bravado had vanished. Jeffers was pale, his jaw tight. Kerr couldn't meet a single gaze. And there, at the center of the panel, flanked by 2 senior judges and the state attorney, sat the man they'd cuffed. Judge Marcus Ellison. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply opened the session with the steadiness of someone who understood both justice and what it cost. "This is not a trial," he began. "It is a review of conduct, of judgment, and of the responsibility that comes with wearing a badge." Video evidence was presented, the same footage seen by millions. Bodycam footage confirmed the search had no warrant. Records showed no report of a stolen car. When asked, Officer Kerr admitted she had never verified the ID, never ran the name. Jeffers fumbled through justifications, talked about gut instinct, protocol, departmental discretion, but it didn't hold. Not anymore. Through it all, Judge Ellison remained neutral, professional, but his eyes never wavered. By 5 p.m., the panel rendered its decision. Both officers were found to have violated proper procedure, failed to respect constitutional rights, and acted on implicit racial bias. Their actions, the report stated, represented a failure of duty and a breach of public trust. They were immediately suspended without pay, pending full investigation. As Marcus read the final verdict aloud, the room fell completely still. No cheers. No applause. Just a silence heavy with reckoning. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Not to chant, but to witness. When the officers were escorted out, no one yelled. They just parted and watched, because something had shifted in that chamber and in the air around it. The press conference began just after sundown. Governor Jameson stood at the podium, the state flag behind him, and Judge Marcus Ellison beside him, silent, composed, unmoved by the cameras. Today was not about vengeance, the governor began. It was about responsibility and transparency, and the kind of leadership we need more of, not less. He paused, then turned slightly. Judge Ellison didn't demand headlines. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call for anyone to be fired. But what he gave us, all of us, was an example of restraint, of principle, of what justice looks like when it wears a quiet face. Marcus didn't blink. He didn't need to. The room felt the weight of those words because they had all seen the video, all seen what could have gone so differently if Marcus had chosen rage over reason. The governor continued, announcing 3 major policy shifts effective immediately: a mandatory statewide training program on de-escalation, racial bias recognition, and constitutional rights for all law enforcement officers; a new independent oversight committee, empowered to investigate civilian complaints in every county, without internal interference; a public audit of past arrest records involving excessive force or racial profiling within the last 5 years. As the room buzzed with murmurs and questions, a reporter called out from the third row, "Judge Ellison, would you like to say anything?" Marcus stepped up. No notes, no teleprompter, just him. His eyes scanned the crowd, not judgmental but unwavering. "What happened to me," he began, "happens every day, to people without a robe, without a title, without someone to speak on their behalf. That is the real injustice." He let the silence sit. "I was not treated like a judge. I was not even treated like a man. I was treated like a risk, based on appearance, on assumption. That's not law. That's fear, in a uniform. End of 50. End of 50. I was treated like a risk. There were no outbursts, no applause, just stillness, a gravity that hung like a verdict. But I believe," Marcus continued, "that wounds, even deep ones, can heal. With truth, with sunlight, with accountability. And with new choices made not in public, but in private, when no one is watching." He ended with a simple nod. No slogan, no rally cry. Just a truth so steady, it didn't need decoration. In the days that followed, something began to shift. Departments across Michigan initiated internal audits. Community town halls were formed. Public defenders began reviewing old cases flagged with similar arrest patterns. Legal clinics offered free consultation to citizens who believed they had been unlawfully detained. And quietly, behind the scenes, the careers of officers Jeffers and Kerr unraveled. Their past cases were opened. Patterns emerged. Misconduct buried beneath paperwork now glared in the light. They weren't just a bad moment. They were a symptom. And the system finally was listening. Marcus, for his part, returned to his courtroom. He never once brought up the incident, never mentioned the video, never changed his tone. But those who appeared before him did. Attorneys spoke with more respect. Officers approached with more caution. Defendants, especially black and brown young men, looked at him not with fear but with something new. Recognition. Because they saw themselves in him. And he saw them. 3 months later, spring arrived in full bloom. Judge Marcus Ellison stood once more in front of an audience, but this time, not in a courtroom or a chamber. He stood on the stone steps of the Michigan Law Enforcement Training Academy, in front of 52 recruits lined in formation, crisp uniforms, eyes forward. This was the first graduating class to complete the new reform curriculum, a program born not just from policy, but from pain. Marcus had turned down several speaking invitations since the incident, but this one felt different. This wasn't about ceremony. It was about planting something. As he adjusted the microphone, the wind caught the edges of his coat. The cadets held their stance, but their eyes were wide, waiting. Marcus began. 3 months ago, he said, I stood on the other side of a badge. I was not seen as a judge or a citizen. I was seen as a threat, based only on a glance and a guess. He paused. That experience could have made me bitter, but instead, it made me more committed, not to punishment, but to purpose. You could see the shift in posture from the front row. You are not here to enforce laws, he said. You are here to protect dignity. That starts with how you see people. Every person. Not as a risk, but as a neighbor, a father, a sister, a teacher, a man in a car on his way to a meeting. A few heads nodded, a few chins lifted. These decisions, the ones you'll make in 5 seconds with no one watching those, are what define justice. He stepped back from the podium. No applause was needed. The cadets filed out in pairs. Families waited nearby with signs, hugs, and cheers. But one young black recruit paused, turned, and walked back to Marcus. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. Marcus looked at him and smiled. "Go serve with honor." As the crowd thinned and the evening light began to fall, Marcus remained on the steps for a moment longer. He wasn't thinking about the handcuffs, or the cold plastic bench, or even the hearing. He was thinking about what comes next. Because real change doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes slowly. One person, one policy, one step, at a time. And on that warm spring afternoon, Judge Marcus Ellison walked away from the training academy not as a victim, but as a builder of something better.